Okay, welcome everyone. It is an absolutely gorgeous day here in New York City. And I tried to teach you outside, but the Wi-Fi wasn't good enough. So instead, I'm in a yellow background. So we're gonna pretend that it's glorious and bright and sunny inside. Okay, so today we are talking about Parshat Vayishlach, which contains dramatic encounter between Yaakov and Esav, who have not seen each other for 2 decades plus. The last time they saw each other, Esav wanted to kill his brother. Another way of saying that is the last time they saw each other, Yaakov really pulled a number, let's say, on his brother. So they have not been friends and they have not really been in touch for all these years. And here we have the scene of Yaakov preparing to encounter his brother after all this time. And what will he say and how will it look? So I'm going to share, I hope. Okay. Hopefully that worked. Yes. Okay, great. So I'm going to start down here. Okay. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav el Esav achiv artza seir sedei Edom. So Jacob sends messengers ahead to his brother Esav in the land of Seir in the country of Edom. And he tells them as follows, Vayitzav otam lemor, ko tomrum la Adoni la Esav, ko amar avdecha Yaakov, im lavan garti, ve'echar ad ata, ve'hili shor v'chamor, tzon ve'eved v'shivcha ve'eshlecha lahagid la Adoni limtzochen be'enecha. So he sends word ahead, buttering up his brother in the following way. He says, tell Esav's people that Jacob, their servant, said, Im Lavan Garti, I stayed with Lavan and remained until now. And I brought you all kinds of things. I have acquired cattle, asses, sheep, and male and female slaves, and I send this message to my Lord in the hope of gaining your favor. Right? So Yaakov is very clear that he's trying to butter up his brother. He's doing it through stuff, right? Giving him all kinds of gifts. He's doing it through language, presenting himself as slave to his brother, and also referring to his brother as his master. Right? And this is hopes of quieting Esav's rage, should he still have it after all these years. And what's one thing that is noteworthy about this imagined encounter, right? This is what Yaakov is telling people to say when they encounter Esav's people. The one thing that he wants people to know about where he's been for all these years, he wants his brother to know that he has been living with their uncle, I think that's right, Lavan. That's what he wants him to know. Im Lavan Garti, right? That's where I've been. If you're curious, that's where I have been. There's no other detail. There's no reference to his family, right? A lot has happened in the course of these 20 years. This is when he has, right, married not one, but 2 women. He's had a whole, drama of his own related to deception. Under Lavan's watch or by Lavan. And he says none of that. He only says, FYI, this is where I lived. And commentators are interested in that detail, or why that detail, or what's so significant about that detail, or what is he trying to communicate to his brother in saying Im Lavan Garti. So if you look at Rashi, source number 3 here, Rashi says, on the words Im Lavan Garti, Lo naaseti sar v'chashuv ela ger. So Rashi notices, or the Midrash notices, that the Hebrew word garti, which means to live or reside, contains within it the word ger. And ger is this really interesting word that means a lot of different things, all of which, though, are related to some degree to kind of strangeness or strangerness. You can call it an alien, an other, a marginal figure. In contemporary Hebrew, the ger is the convert to, in our case, to Judaism, or just a convert, I should say. But in the biblical context, it doesn't necessarily mean convert at all. It is used to describe those who are alien or minority, peripheral, right? Jews were considered gerim in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. And here Yaakov says to his brother, I have become neither a prince nor other person of importance, but rather merely a ger, here translated as sojourner, meaning I never quite found my roots there with Lavan, lest you think that I have, made it all these years, lest you think I have found a home when I ran away from our shared home. This is Yaakov to Esav. I want to let you know that I'm just a nobody. And remember, the last time they saw each other, there were arguments over blessings. And part of the blessing was, from Yitzchak, their father, to each of them was a blessing. If you recall, Yiten ve'achzor v'yiten, that was the theme from a couple of weeks ago. But Yitzchak says, God is going to bestow blessing upon you, material blessing. But the blessing that ultimately goes to Yaakov instead of Esav has to do with kind of domination. Maybe it's not the best word, but who's going to be master over whom? Rav Yavod Sa'ir is the original kind of prophecy that the older, will serve the younger. And so in part, can you hear me? Okay, I just saw that I froze, I think. Am I right? Okay.
Erin, we can hear you fine, but would you mind zooming in on the text just a little more?
Sure. Thank you for that. I usually do that, and I'm sorry. Is that
No
better?
problem. Much better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I was just saying, right, that the blessing that was given to Yaakov, or the prophecy about him that ultimately would become his blessing, indicated that he would actually be master over Esav. And so in a sense, one could imagine he might be approaching his brother saying, I know you were really worried about that blessing, but don't worry, it didn't quite come true, right? Because I'm actually not such a great guy. I'm not such a master, right? Or you might be concerned that I became a really rich guy when I was away from you, and that, daddy's blessing endowed me with tremendous wealth. But hey, I really never achieved that. So, so don't worry, I'm not a threat to you, essentially. Or don't worry, that resentment that you have, that I stole your blessing, hey, you don't need to be so upset, perhaps, because it didn't really come true in me, or it didn't come true in me yet. That might be one way to read it, right? So actually, I'm anticipating what Rashi says here. He says, "Incha kedai lisno oti al birkat avicha sheberachani havei gvir la'achicha sheharei lo nitzkaimabi." Right? So it's not worth your while to hate me on account of the blessing of your father who blessed me. I'm over here. Be master over thy brethren, for it has not been fulfilled in me. Right? So that's one understanding of what. So if the opening question is, what is Yaakov trying to communicate in this singular detail that he gives to his brother of Im Lavan Garti? What's the message that he's trying to convey? He's trying to convey to his brother, I'm not a threat to you. I didn't make it big. Don't worry. I was just passing through. I didn't acquire neither grand importance or great amounts of fortune. None of that happened. Don't worry. Another option, davar acher, garti bigematria taryag. So this is a reading that rests on Jewish numerology, or gematria, which ascribes numbers to every letter, numerical values, that is, to every letter. And Rashi notices that the letters Garti, Gimel, Resh, Taf, Yud equal in number the same as Taryag. Taryag is 613. So what is Yaakov trying to tell Lavan? That he's been a very good, observant Jewish boy. hey, Lavan, I want you to know all 613, forgetting the fact that they haven't been given yet. But okay, right? Don't worry. I know you've been worried, Esav, about my religious integrity, but don't worry. I've been great. I've been keeping up. Klomar im Lavan garti v'taryag mitzvot shamarti. Right? I kept all of those mitzvot. V'lo lamadati mima'asav hara'im. Here, there's an additional valence. So not only is Yaakov conveying his piety, which might not be such a great move if you're trying to soften somebody else's opinions. Maybe don't lead with how great you are. But in any case, right, he's saying, Lo lamadati mima'asav hara'im means I have not learned, or I have learned not of his evil ways. It's right there, right? So don't worry, I stuck. So let me say this in a way that's a little bit less derisive. So I'm sorry. One could say that Yaakov was saying to his brother, look, I kept our family traditions. I didn't essentially assimilate into an alternative culture, and I wasn't turned by Lavan and his evil ways. I'm still a good guy coming from the same shared home and maybe shared values that we had in our parental home. That's another way of seeing it. There are probably many other ways of seeing it, but those two ideas all rest again on this word garti. And that's what we're going to focus on in the language of the Sfat Emet, to see what he does with this word as well, with the broader idea being what is so essential about it, or what is so crucial to Yaakov's own self-understanding that he brings this to his brother after decades apart. This one message, Im Lavan Garti. So now I'm going to scroll up to the text itself, which is here. Okay. So here we are in 1893, and we are starting again on these words. Bepasuk Im Lavan Garti, Piresh Rashi, which we just looked at, Lo na'aseti sar v'chashuv elager. Davar acher taryag mitzvot shamarti. Okay, so here we just have a recapitulation of what we just saw, right? He brings us the opening, or that phrase from the verse Im Lavan Garti, and he brings us the two opinions of Rashi. One is I'm a nobody, and the other is I'm a pious individual who observes 613 commandments. Nir'ah shezeh tachlit hamitzvot shehem mechuvanim la'evarim v'gidim shel ha'adam ki aguf hu malbush hanefesh v'haneshama ve'adam tzarich leida ki hu ger ba'olam hazeh. I know that was a lot of words, and I'm going to translate. I'm going to translate with a proviso. When I told Rabbi Josh Fagelson that I would be teaching this text, he was very nervous because IJS does not do dualism, and we don't say bad things about the body. So I'm totally not bringing this to necessarily advocate for this perspective about the mind and the body and their relationship. But I am going to present it to you because I think it has integrity to do so, and because I think that actually this has a tremendous amount to teach. Okay, so the Sfat Emet obviously goes far afield from where Rashi leaves this phrase of Im Lavan Garti. And he makes an enormous claim that really what Yaakov was doing is conveying a message about tachlit hamitzvot, right? So if we already imagine, right, he somehow knows all 613 commandments, not only that, but now he's got the kind of the meta philosophy on top of it, of what's it all about. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about it. More broadly, let's just say, right, what is the let's say the Jewish pathways to God? What are they, or what are they oriented towards? What are they aiming towards? What is the aspiration of all of these different ways of being? And he says, I'm going to start with the end and come back to the beginning of that line. Ve'adam tzarich leida ki hu ger ba'olam hazeh. The whole purpose of the kind of religious system, if you will, or the whole purpose of kind of spiritual inquiry, is for a person to know that we, all people, are gerim. What does that mean? Okay, I'm going to just say that again. The entire system or the entire frame of spiritual inquiry is oriented around a directive, I would say, right? For a person to stay conscious of their strangeness or of their strangeness. That's what it's all about. And it's strangeness relative to Olam Hazeh, relative to this world. So now let's think about what he means by that. And then I'm going to sort of compare it to, in a little bit, I'm going to compare it to what another actually Hasidic thinker who makes much of strangeness also has to say about this subject. Okay, so now coming back to the earlier words, Nir'ah shezeh tachlit hamitzvot shehem mechuvanim la'evarim v'gidim shel adam, ki haguf hu malbush hanefesh v'haneshama v'adam tzarich leidah ki hu ger ba'olam hazeh. Translation is, it seems that this is the purpose of the mitzvot, to direct the organs and tendons of a person, because the body is a garment for the soul and spirit, and a person must know that they are a foreigner in this world. He goes on. Here's where the dualism comes in. In what sense is a person strange in this world, or not quite of this world, or uncomfortable, not fully at ease, not fully of this world? So here's where he presents ideas about bodies and souls and how human beings are these combinations, right, of somewhat earthly and somewhat kind of eternal concerns, let's say, right? The way that he sees it, right, is that like the body, the poor body is just of this earth, and the soul is only here, he says, accidentally, b'mikra, like, or a little bit, or partially, right? But our kind of essential being, our full spiritual, like, I don't know, efflorescence is to be found elsewhere in a different kind of existence, an existence that is purely spiritual. And he goes on to, so I'm going to read it for you inside of the text. And I again recognize that it might be a little bit alienating, but I'm hoping to make the case that it's actually quite interesting. Okay, so I'm going to read it in English. It seems that this is the purpose of the mitzvot. I read that already. Sorry. The truth is that the soul is only accidentally or partially in this world. It is essentially in the higher world. The body is essentially in this world and accidentally in the higher world, right? So he has this kind of stratified view, right? There's a lower world and an upper world, or a human world essentially, and a heavenly or spiritual domain, right? And humans, we have our bodies in this world, and we're attached to a kind of spiritual consciousness. But that spiritual consciousness is, again, an attachment to something that is not essentially of this world, but is of something else, is a different kind of, I don't know, I guess said consciousness already, but that's what I mean. He says the body is essentially in this world and accidentally in the higher world, and therefore the righteous person who overpowers the body with the soul is like a stranger in this world. Okay, so let me just kind of parse this in a way that I hope is a little bit more accessible. From his perspective, right, we are body and soul, right? And when we try to be more soulful or more conscious or more attuned to presence or mystery or holiness or any of that, we're actually in a certain sense fighting the kind of the material world itself. And so we find ourselves of this world, for sure. We are embodied creatures. And he says the system of mitzvot is precisely to involve the body in a spiritual inquiry, as I said before. But the kind of the authentic world, or the higher consciousness, is something that is not in our bodies, but outside of it. What I actually want to do today, which is a little bit different from what we've done in the past, is again, kind of put the Sfat Emet into conversation with another Hasidic thinker who I think helps to make this idea of strangerness and the kind of essential aim of, of spiritual life to render ourselves as strangers. I think that this other thinker in a different language helps to make it a little bit more accessible. So I'm going to do that. And then when we open up for conversation, we can come back to this text more directly if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to come down here. This is a text from the Degel Machane Ephraim. This is Rabbi Chaim Chaim Sudlikov, who is the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, which means that he predates the Sfat Emet. So in theory, one might imagine, though I have absolutely no way of knowing, that maybe the Sfat Emet is aware of the Degel Machane Ephraim's perspectives on a similar idea, but I don't know. So the Degel, as we'll call him, is reflecting on a different verse, right? Not from our Parsha of Vayishlach, but rather from Vayikra or Leviticus, which references the idea of Gerut. This verse is source 4, right? Leviticus 25:23. V'ha'aretz lo timacher litzmitut, ki li ha'aretz ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. But the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. So we are all inside of a Shemitah year, which is like the 7th year of letting the land lay fallow. And this is a reference to Shemitah, or it might even be the 50th year, the Jubilee. But it's a description of like why we do this in a sense, or one of the reasons is to recognize that, right, that land doesn't actually belong to any one person. There is no ownership because God says the land is actually mine. You are but strangers resident with me. In Hebrew, ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. The simple reading of this text is that, God is communicating that we must let the land lay fallow because we human beings are not really the owners of land. We need to recognize that we are mere stewards, right? And that God is the owner. And rather than just stewards, we are but strangers resident with me, right? We are just people who like sit on the land. I was going to say occupy, but that's like a little bit weighty, right? But we are people who live on any land, but we are residents with God, who's the real owner, right? We are just strangers on that land, right? Or here, I do think stewards might be a fine, not a quite translation, but it captures the idea that we're stewarding land, but we're not owning land. That is the simple meaning of that text. But the Degel Machane Ephraim takes it in a very different direction. And he says the following. And the English is down here. I'll read a little bit. And I'm sorry that it's on 2 separate pages. Yesh lomar bazeh, b'derech remez, Al pisha shamati mechacham echad al pasuk ger anochi ba'aretz al tastir mimeni mitzvotecha. Okay, so here we already begin with a reference to another verse, this one in Psalms that says, where King David says, ger anochi ba'aretz, I, King David, am a stranger in this land. Do not hide your mitzvot from me, he says to God. And he goes on. Ki yadua min echut teva ha'olam ki mi shehu ger ein lo imi ledabek v'lekarev atzmo v'lesaper lo et kol me'urotav v'chol libo she'ein lo chaver lo Yisrael v'lo goyim ach kshero'eh chavero hager azai mesaper kol echad bifnei chavero kol me'urotav. I'm going to switch to English now. I'm sorry, that was a lot of Hebrew. It is a known feature of this world that one who is a ger, and I'm purposefully not translating it to mean one single thing here. It is known that it is a feature of this world that one who is a ger does not have anyone to be close to and to draw near to and to tell about all that has happened to him and what is in his heart, since he does not have a friend, neither in Israel nor among the nations. But when that ger sees a fellow ger, then each one can tell the other all that has happened. Okay, so I'll just stop there for a moment, right? So here we have a kind of mashal, or a fable, or a something, which means, or which indicates, right, this, I think, very poignant image of somebody who sits on the margins of their community, society, even, group of friends, but feels alienated. This person doesn't feel like she can share what's in her heart. She just feels totally isolated. We don't know why. However, when that person encounters another person on the margins, those two individuals can share with one another, can find solidarity with one another. Somebody wrote to me, I'm not sure if she's on the call today, about this, who said that it's like a beautiful notion of a support group, right? Or like an AA kind of meeting, which is people who have whatever their issue, and it doesn't need to be that, doesn't need to be addictive. It could just be whatever it is that you feel separates you from your surroundings, that you feel you cannot actually share, right? You might actually find comfort and, again, solidarity and healing and friendship, frankly, right, with another individual or individuals who is similarly estranged or similarly isolated or similarly ashamed, God forbid, right? That is an interesting dynamic, I think, of real human psychology. And so he says that the relationship between gerim has kind of unique power, that one person's kind of strangeness can meet another person's strangeness. And he goes on, and I'll read this in English. And it is known that the Holy Blessed One is like a ger in this world, because the divine does not have anyone upon whom to rest the divine presence, since we humans are limited. This is the meaning of David's prayer, I am a ger in the land. I too do not want to be a resident in this world. I am also just a ger in it. Therefore, do not hide your commands from me, like one ger to another who tells him everything in his heart. This is the meaning of the verse in Leviticus, you are but strangers and residents with me. When you are a ger in this world and a resident in the next, then you are with me, says God, because I too, God, am a ger in this world, and therefore will not hide from you my commandments. Okay, so this last part here, and I think I will turn the screen share off for now so I can see some of you. If you want to turn on your cameras so I could see you a little, that would be nice. Makes me feel like I'm talking to somebody. Thank you so much. In any case, right, so there are a lot of metaphors out there for, who or what God is, and our tradition has offered quite a few. Most of them are men, but not all. And here we certainly have a kind of gender neutral God as ger, not God as king and not God as father, right? But God is a ger. God is a stranger. Maybe God is a convert too. I don't know, right? But God is a convert. Sorry, God is a stranger, somewhat foreign to this world. And I'd love for us to open up in conversation to think a little bit about, like, in what sense, or how might we actually think about that. I'll just put a few kind of seeds out there and we can discuss it, right? But there, we can think about it in kind of grand metaphysical terms, like God is something other than human, right? God is, it says in Isaiah, like, lo machshavotai machshavotechem velo darkechem derachai. Your thoughts are not my thoughts and your ways are not my ways, right? Like, we're totally different entities. So in that sense, right, God is not one of us, though surely there's been lots of Sfat Emets that might make you think otherwise. But in any case, from this perspective, right, God is other in that way. God is, transcendent from the world, and God isn't always known to this world. And that's certainly a theme that we've, spent a lot of time on, right, that God is hidden in this world. And so we ought to imagine, right, a lonely God sitting somewhere on the margins, feeling alone. And though there might be people out there seeking, right, there is a way in which one will, of course, never find. And so here we have this idea of a God as ger. I'm going to take questions in a moment. So I just want to come back to the idea of the Degel Machane Ephraim. What is it that David asks for when he says to God, ger anochi, right? I am a stranger with you, right? The suggestion of the Degel Machane Ephraim is that, right, that David's biggest hope was actually to align himself with God in a joint support group for those on the margins. That actually, right, that David experiences himself as also isolated, alone. There are all kinds of stories from, the books that he's in, about times that he has been either alienated from his family members, alienated from, the wider population, in situations of grave conflict. So we could see it that way, or we could also see, leadership is lonely. When we said, that's right. Oh, look, there's an active chat and I didn't even see it. Sorry. Now I do though. Right. So somebody put 12-step groups in there. That's exactly what I was suggesting before, that somebody else had also put in my mind, right? The idea of, right, any kind of support group whatsoever. I like to think about this on a personal level. I experienced a great deal of struggles around infertility, and I did join a support group, and I certainly found it to be the thing, or a thing that carried me through. Thank God I'm a proud mother now, but it took some time. And definitely being in communication and in solidarity with other people who were very much in the same position was incredibly healing, and unquestionably offered a very deep kind of communion or friendship in a time when I otherwise felt very, very, very isolated. Everybody, I'm sure, has their own examples, or I would imagine so. I hope people have found solidarity when they needed it. So I don't put that out there as some grand example, but the idea of that as some kind of model of human God relationship is very, very, very different from a lot of the other metaphorical images that we tend to encounter. And I'd like to imagine, perhaps, kind of putting together now both the Degel Machane Ephraim and the Sfat Emet together. When the Sfat Emet says that what Yaakov was doing was presenting himself to Esav as a ger, when he says Im Lavan Garti, he understands it to mean I have been a ger, or I am a stranger. I have been living in a way not at ease, on the margins, not at home, right? All of these years I have been a stranger. And the claim is that I understand strangerness. I understand that that's who I am. And the larger claim of the Sfat Emet is that that's actually something that we ought to want to cultivate, not because we want to be uncomfortable in our own skin per se, but that recognizing the ways that we don't fit in and the ways that we aren't quite settled, right? The opposite of, right, ger is toshav, the way in which we aren't fully settled in our lives, in our communities, in our cultures, in our societies, right? The ways in which we feel other is actually a spiritual opportunity. It's a spiritual opportunity to seek out, other with a capital O, right? the greatest other of them all, right? God the Ger. And that's something about alienation itself can be harnessed in the spiritual life. So I would say that I think that, right, there's both a very grand spiritual kind of frame being offered here, and also I think a human frame that names some of the dynamics of friendship and that which can actually help people bond with one another in a much more explicit way. We have all kinds of other texts, right? In fact, sorry, but I'm going to get the number wrong, so forgive me. But the idea, the notion that one has to remember that we, the Jewish people, were gerim in Mitzrayim. I believe it is repeated definitely over 30 times in the Torah. And certainly that has been wonderfully noticed as a source of social action, right? If we've been strangers, let's make sure that we generate empathy and support others who are strangers, right? From an activist standpoint. And here I think there's kind of like a spiritual frame that's being offered too, right? That so many times we are enjoined to remember our strangerness. And here the claim is that if we remember our strangerness, not only in the lands of Egypt, but each and every day, the ways in which we feel not at peace, not at home, it might actually enable us, right, both to connect to other people who experience marginality, and ultimately as well to this sort of grand force of otherness who is characterized by this kind of loneliness and marginality. Okay, I'm going to stop there and open up for questions and comments, and I'd love to hear comments on either the Sfat Emet text or the Dega Machane Ephraim or some combination thereof. All right, go ahead. So Roberta Wall, you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh, thank you. You really said 90% of what I was thinking after.
10%.
And just to say, thank you for this such beautiful Torah. And I just have a whole new idea of B'Tselem Elohim.
Yeah, nice.
That it's obviously not physical. That it's this this awareness of encounter with loneliness and strangeness in this world. And it's when I think about I've really been struggling this week, wrestling with the Torah interpretations that see Esau's falling on Jacob's neck as a bite rather than a kiss. And I really have this sense that the Degel and the Sfat Emet are giving us a completely different way of looking at this.
For sure.
Right? That really the way to transform this suspicion and fear and separation that's become so much a part of our tradition, and it's hurting us so deeply, that the way to overcome it is to see that B'Tselem Elohim, no, we are all strangers. And we are all equal, and that we've got to see that in each other, and use that as a way of bringing us together.
Yeah, I mean, that's also an interesting. What I hear, at least in what you're adding, is that the joining of stranger to stranger could also be seen as Jacob and Esau joining, right? And that Esav perhaps has experienced himself, right? He's the one that's been marginalized in a way in the family, right? Yes, Yaakov has been physically, right? He marginalized himself physically by leaving the home and running away to save himself. But Esav, right, has been left behind, but feeling marginalized by a mother who betrayed him, right, a father who maybe didn't, got it wrong, right, and certainly a brother who betrayed him, right, and so he has got to be feeling some of that, and so for Jacob to approach him and say, right, not I certainly for Esav not to bite him, but for Jacob to approach him and join him rather than present himself as some kind of an enemy, right? I suppose it might be a word for like allyship here, right? He's presenting himself as an ally, as someone who's joined in a cause.
Brothers. They are
brothers,
right?
Well said, right? That's the simplest way of putting it, right? They're the brothers, right? And they share a lot.
Well,
and it's a way to get.
And then just because this is also the parsha with the story of Dinah, I've been thinking about what Anita Diamond did to say, wait a minute. So, maybe they're, instead of looking at what happened between Dinah and Shechem as, this horrible violence, to see it as two seekers, like she went out to meet the women and he went out, and, that here they were, strangers among different peoples. I mean, I like to think of it that way. And I'm wondering, I know this is totally a different point than what you're addressing in the Parsha, but the words, I've been reading up about the words for rape and what it meant historically. And I don't know if you have any space.
We're not there right now,
okay,
thankfully.
But anyway, I think it's in there because the parsha
is in the parsha, yes.
And the parsha ends with verses and verses about the progeny of Esau. If that is not a healing and a bringing back in, right? So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Linda, I like your last name. Go ahead. Shivers.
So they're not just brothers, they're twins. And there's a special connection between twins.
Yeah. Right. I think all this is very, very interesting. And it's also particularly interesting, though, to think about why not lead with that then, right? If the message is, hey, we're really, at the end of the day, like, let's love each other and let's be brothers. Why not say that? Why go this route? And I guess, from the perspective of these Hasidic thinkers, there's actually something captured in the notion of ger that isn't necessarily there in family, right? And that ger is precisely one who feels on the outskirts of family, or one who has to do something to gain entrance into family. And in that way, it kind of sort of takes the brother connection and flips it on its head. It almost, by using the ger, it's like saying, I know that we actually are connected, but we are both sitting kind of outside of that relationship and we need to find our way back in. That's just some thoughts about that, but I do really appreciate that. Other reactions, I saw some things in the chat, but I'll just, anybody want to jump in?
I have,
go ahead, Ilana. Ilana asked.
Oh, sorry. So I have a few like baking thoughts, so they're not fully out of the oven yet. But I'm thinking of the verses from Isaiah, and I can't cite, chapter verse, but that my thoughts are not like, that God speaks through Isaiah. My thoughts are not like your thoughts, and my ways are not like your ways. So I'm thinking that there's almost a paradigm being set up here that makes, let's call it gerism, the state of being a ger, the norm. Whereas we are often taught, especially in our Western culture, that we, in all circumstances, want to move out of a state of gerism. We want to be connected, and we want to be fulfilled, and we want to know everything that we need to know. But so if David and God are meant to be connected through their feelings of being ger, and therefore we can too, but ultimately there's still something that separates, God's sense of being a ger from a human sense of being a ger. So it's like setting up an interesting model for us that if we don't reach the goal that we want, say, I'll just use my own life because I can't speak to other things. I can think of analogies to all sorts of things. But I, for example, am an Israeli American, so I'm not 100% comfortable in Israel. I'm not 100% comfortable in America, and I'm learning slowly to actually be comfortable with that. Whereas I always wanted to say I belong in Israel or I belong in America. And we can, and one of the things that connects my husband and I strongly, even though many things we don't share. For example, he's Jewish, but he doesn't have a Jewish spiritual life, and I have an active one, for example. But this sense of being gerim, whether we're in America or in Israel, even though I was born and raised here, but I don't feel like 100% that I belong here. It is actually, I'm getting more and more comfortable with this notion during my life than thinking that there is something wrong with me. Like when I look at people who have lots of close friends, I have a lot of friends, but people who just, like, I'm in Chicago, so people in Chicago, they've known the same people in Chicago forever, and they have these large families in Chicago. They feel very rooted. And I feel like as much as I love Chicago and I've been here for over 20 years, I could get up and leave, and it would be just like I left 2 kibbutzim already. I left this whole country of Israel, what I loved, and left my childhood, and I ended up in. So now I'm beginning to wonder if this is for some sort of a normal state for those who are living it. And as you said earlier, an opportunity there for a deeper spiritual, connection. Because I'm not supposed to be moving out of this. I'm supposed to be embracing it instead. And that's my thoughts at the moment.
Thank you. And a really good example, like a really, really good example of strangeness, of neither here nor there, and identities that are mixed. And and the suggestion here is to see that as an opportunity as opposed to something to overcome. Jan, I'm glad you raised your hand because I saw your comment in the chat and I really want to go there. So please.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry. Move the mic a little bit closer to me. Yeah, it's really hard to, as I said in the comments, to think about God as feeling care. I'm in a Hevruta with someone and studying your weekly Torah. Thank you very much. And there was something that you said, I'm just trying to find it here. I don't know if I can find it fast enough, but I know it was at the top of a page and we really liked it. And it was just about God feeling the feelings that God had in different words than using the word ger. Like, maybe we understood disconnected from humankind because they're not reaching up, they're not available, they're not, they're disinterested in the connection. But yeah, it's really strange to think using the word ger for God.
Yeah, it is really strange. Which is why I don't think it hasn't made it, deep into liturgy, let's say, though I would love to see it there.
Well, write something.
All of you will write them, exactly. But let's just talk for a moment, though, about the idea of a vulnerable God and like why we would ever sort of want to even imagine that. First of all, you don't have to, right? We've got lots of other metaphors. If you like to think in metaphors and this one doesn't work for you, so be it. Though I'm not sure that it's more alienating than, God as king or father, or, for different reasons, of course. But really the idea of a God who is kind of lonely and other, Heschel said, right, talked about God in search of man or people, right? So God being in search of humankind is a trope that is found. And I think it is hard, right? And it challenges some more like salvific pictures of a powerful God who's going to save you from this or that. That's just not what this is. But the idea that there might be a God who might sit with you is a very powerful one. And this is maybe coming from left field, so forgive me. with 10 minutes left to like do this, but I'll just say that I have a personal interest in a different Rabbi, the Piazetzner Rebbe, the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto. And I wrote my dissertation about him and his Holocaust theology. And I must tell you that one of the really interesting things about him, right, he's writing between 1939 and 1942. And what's a Hasidic Rabbi going to tell his community, right, literally as they're going through the war and all of their losses? And one thing that's very interesting to track is the way in which this kind of theology really becomes much more prominent or dominant, if you will, over time, right? And that though it might be hard to relate to, it's actually very interesting that in moments of crisis, particularly when you might have given up on the idea of anyone or anything saving you, the idea that somebody just might sit with you can actually be quite a powerful image and relationship, right? Which I think we as human beings tend hopefully to do for one another. We show up. We can't change it and we can't make it better, but we just show up. Halavai, if only we could make it better, right? And if only we could count on a God who would intervene and make things better. But when that relationship is not available, when one can't actually believe in that or enter into that or resonate with that at all, the notion of a presence that is in solidarity, interestingly, has very real resonance for some. So, that was just kind of an aside, but we have like just this little bit of kind of, somewhat contemporary evidence that though God wasn't necessarily identified as ger in those texts, we do have a long line of tradition of God suffering with the Jewish people, which is in a certain sense related, right? Imo anochi b'tzara is the phrase, right? God says, I am with you in your pain. And here it's kind of emotional pain, and there are lots of ways in which that has been interpreted, but the idea that God would be joining with people, or that we could join God, right, not in a place of strength, but actually in a place of vulnerability, is something that, we do find in other places in the tradition. Okay.
Could you just say where that quote is from? Imo
anochi b'tzara. Where is it from? I'm going to say Isaiah, but I'm not sure. Somebody else can maybe look at it. Imo anochi b'tzara. I am with them in their pain. I think it's in Isaiah, but I'm not 100% positive, and certainly deployed in a lot of Talmudic texts as a way of describing a God who suffers along with the Jewish people. So I can look that up for next time. Okay, Susan Adler.
Thank you, Rabbi. What occurs to me when I think about the times in my life when I've been in a state of ger, moving from one part of the country to another, it's a combination of feelings, very much being so alert, and a sense of being so much more sensitive to wonderful things and also difficult things. So I think when you reference it to this example of these twins separated for 20 years coming or anticipating returning to see one another again, I think about all the intensity of feelings that surround that.
Yeah, like think about all the moments that maybe we've all had in the past year of maybe reconnecting in person, if we're so blessed, to someone we haven't seen, right? Even if it's just in 18 months, right? And and the kind of sensitivity that, right, we might feel towards another person, and to the like awareness that we have of the connection and the nature of the relationship, and, things that we might not have recognized if we have access all the time. Then when we experience alienation and isolation in these literal ways, right? There's something really, really, really unique and like amplified, emotionally amplified.
Right, and you capture that so beautifully in your opening to this whole parsha from the quote from the book.
Oh, yeah, thank you. That is a beautiful book,
wow.
Susan is referencing a book that Together in a Sudden Strangeness is a book of poetry about the pandemic that was put out during the pandemic. And that phrase, together in a sudden strangeness, has been very resonant for me as a description of pandemic life. It's from Pablo Neruda, but it captures the strangeness that we've all kind of been finding our way through, and just that itself, right, in it together, a sudden strangeness, but together in a sudden strangeness, something happened to us collectively as a society when we found ourselves together in this period of total strangeness and disorientation. So I think with that, we will close. And I will see you next week. Is that right? Even though it's Thanksgiving. Not see you. Sorry. Right. As I said it, I knew there was something about next week. What is it? Oh, yes, Thanksgiving. So I will not see you next week. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And also happy Hanukkah, because it will be Hanukkah also the next time I see you. And I look forward to that. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much, Dr.